Hello there, welcome to Africa Live, CCTV's new program that brings you African and global news from all perspectives. I'm Ramanyang in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Here's what else we have lined up for you in the next half hour. A monumental task, the search for a new governor. The Reserve Bank of Zimbabwe continues. And ready for the duel, Al Ahly and Guangzhou Evergrande prepare for a decisive face-off. Let's start in South Africa. Thousands of citizens of that country queued for the third day in a row to pay their respects to the former president, Nelson Mandela. His body is lying in state at the Union Buildings in Pretoria, where Mandela was sworn in as South Africa's first black president in 1994. Friday is the third and final day when Mandela's body will lie in state. He will then be buried at his ancestral home in Kunu on Sunday. Let's cross over live now to our reporter, Famida Miller. She is in Pretoria. Famida, it is a final day of the viewing of Mandela's remains. What's the mood there like?
That's right, Rama. It is in fact the final day, and we've seen a huge number of people coming through to Pretoria, specifically the Union Buildings. Now, if you remember, because it being the final day, this process of viewing Mr. Mandela's body did begin on Monday, rather on Wednesday, when he began with lying in state. And we had the family coming through, and since then, since Wednesday afternoon, it's been a huge number of members of the public. Now, yesterday there were about 12,000 people. Today, the government say about 50,000 have come through. Now, while that number is unbelievable, it was expected, because this is the final opportunity, at least for people here in Gauteng, to be part of this funeral process, this memorial, and saying goodbye to the former president. The mood here certainly is somber. We did see singing, dancing, celebration in the past week. However, as people file through the Union Buildings to view Mr. Mandela's body, and it's a very short period of time where they're allowed to do that, there's certainly a mood of respect, and people have really just come here to say goodbye. It's the last opportunity they can do that. Rama.
Indeed. The burial, of course, will take place on Sunday. So what should we expect to happen between now and then?
Well, the people coming through to see Mr. Mandela's body through the day, that will end at about 5 p.m. this afternoon. Authorities here say that the body must return to one military hospital by sunset. Now, once that's completed on Saturday, we will see Mr. Mandela's body being taken to Kunu in the Eastern Cape, his home village, and his body will be taken to Waterkloof Air Force Base here in Pretoria, where the African National Congress will have a ceremony bidding him farewell. From there, it will be flown to the Eastern Cape. And on Sunday, we'll see the burial taking place, expected to start at about 9 a.m. There will be a church ceremony before that, where about 5,000 people will be allowed to attend. Government says here that's the maximum allowed. And following that, there will be the burial, which the family has asked be closed and private. Only family members, dignitaries and close friends will be allowed to attend that. So that will be earlier. Prior to that, that will be the last opportunity for people in that area to pay their respects. And on Monday, of course, we do expect to see the unveiling of a new Mandela statue just behind me here at the Union Buildings. And that's a final memorial to this global icon that people here in South Africa surely say they'll miss.
Indeed. Thank you very much for that update. That's CCTV's Famida Miller at the Union Buildings over in South Africa. Of course, it is a final day when individuals from really across the world can pay their final respects to Mr. Nelson Mandela. Now, as mourners do continue to gather around the world to prepare for Nelson Mandela's funeral this weekend, New Yorkers crowded into Harlem's Riverside Church on Wednesday evening for a rather unique send-off to a man who influenced millions of Americans. From New York, our correspondent Stephen Fee found this report.
Amid the high arches of New York's Riverside Church, joyful song to honor Mandela. And words to memorialize the former South African president.
Is there any continent, is there any nation that is not joined with us right now in calling the name Nelson Mandela?
He came to this church twice, in 2005 and in 1990, just months after his release from prison.
The structures of apartheid are crumbling. The old order is crumbling. But the age of freedom has not yet dawned.
Former New York City Mayor David Dinkins was Mandela's host during that celebrated New York visit.
At this moment in history, and as long as there are people who hold dear the principles to which Nelson Mandela dedicated his life, we can proudly say that we are the soldiers of Madiba.
Luminaries and religious leaders paid tribute and called Mandela an inspiration to act.
Maybe today the greatest testimony to our commitment, not to his memory, but to his life, is to realize that you get no star of approval for being an armchair activist.
We are the ones that must fight the battle now so that we can be deserving to be called your children. You took your long walk to freedom. We are so far behind you, but at least we know the direction because we will follow your footsteps to that right path.
After an evening of soaring speeches, South Africa's Consul General rose to the podium and offered merely a simple word of thanks to the people of New York City and the Riverside Church that became a second home to late President Nelson Mandela. Stephen Fee, CCTV, New York.
Let's get back to South Africa. About 24 hours from now, the body of South Africa's first black president, Nelson Mandela, should be in the Eastern Cape province, where he will be laid to rest at his family's homestead in Kunu village on Sunday. Mandela's burial there will be the fulfillment of a wish he made prior to his death. Rene Delcam has this report.
The world is watching, and the people of Kunu are waiting for their great hero, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, to make his final journey home. Last-minute touches are being made for the Eastern Cape leg of the former president's state funeral, which will take place here on Sunday. On Saturday, there will be a procession through the streets of the nearby city of Mthatha and through the village of Kunu to the Mandela home. The military will hand Madiba's body to his political party, South Africa's ruling party, the African National Congress, before the family lays him to rest at their private estate. People here are hoping for clear skies during the funeral, so thousands of mourners can give Madiba a big send-off. Although some around these parts believe that the continuous rain of the past few days is a sign that a great person has died. Rene Delcam, CCTV, Kunu.
Let's take a short break here on Africa Live. There's plenty more, however, coming up. We'll be focusing on escalating tensions when we come back. Mobs continue to run amok in the Central African Republic's capital as sectarian violence there persists.
We follow the latest trends in global politics, economics, culture and sport, and how Africa fits into the global picture. You decide what's important.
We need some trade justice.
Africa's future will be determined by Africa.
For women's equal opportunity, for a better life. We have to change something, and it's not the outsiders.
Talk Africa, a new voice for the world.
Welcome back. Now, just before the break, we did mention, of course, that 24 hours from now, the remains of South Africa's first black head of state, Nelson Mandela, should be in the Eastern Cape province, where he will be laid to rest at his family's homestead in Kunu on Sunday. Let's go live there right now. CCTV's Robert Nagila is standing by. Robert, what's the latest from Kunu ahead of Sunday's events?
Well, preparations here in Kunu, the ancestral home of former South African President Nelson Mandela, are now in top gear.
security preparations. We've seen checks on the roads. We've seen checks up in the air as well. Now, what's going to happen is we expect the body to arrive here in Kunu at some point tomorrow afternoon. That's on Saturday. Now, what the military has done is they've taken over the Nelson Mandela Hospital here in Kunu. The reason for that being that they are expecting quite a few leaders from different countries for this funeral as well. And just in case one of them needs any medical treatment, that's where they will be treated. Now, the airspace over Kunu has also been shut down to commercial aviation or any other air. That's primarily for security reasons. Now, like I said, the body arrives here on Saturday, and on Sunday, that's when the funeral takes place. Now, that will take place, if you can just see that white tent behind me, that's where the funeral and burial will take place on Sunday.
Indeed. Thank you very much for that update. That's CCTV's Robert Nagila in Kunu, of course, the site of Nelson Mandela's burial. He'll be keeping tabs on developments over there for you, and will give you updates in subsequent bulletins at 1700 GMT. Right now, though, let's move on to other news across Africa, starting in the DRC. That country's government signed a peace deal on Thursday with the M23 rebels, whom it managed to defeat last month. Now, this deal has been described as groundbreaking, and the deal was signed by President Joseph Kabila in the presence of regional leaders in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Here's Clementine Logan with more.
A major step on the path to peace for the Democratic Republic of Congo. Within the three documents signed, provisions for the disarmament and dissolution of M23 as an armed group. Under the deal, it's set to transform itself into a legitimate political party. Also, an agreement to renounce violence and rebellion. In return, the government says it will release and give amnesty to M23 members in detention for acts of war and rebellion. However, Congolese government spokesman Lambert Mende reiterated that those accused of criminal behavior under international law, war crimes or crimes against humanity would not be reinserted into society.
The signing of this agreement is groundbreaking and resounding, as it represents another chapter in terms of how the Congolese government and the M23 should engage with one another in an amicable and peaceful atmosphere, so that the humanitarian security situation in the eastern DRC is permanently resolved.
The M23 took up arms in eastern DR Congo in April 2012, accusing the government of marginalizing the ethnic Tutsi minority and failing to honor previous agreements. Mediating between the two, Uganda's president was adamant that coming to the negotiating table was the only way for the group to have their demands heard.
That's what I told these M23 people. If there is war, all the problems you are talking about will not even be addressed. But now that there is peace, it is high time to address the ideological issues and also the development issues.
It's hoped the deal will allow the more than 2 million displaced people to begin returning home. International partners, including the United Nations and African Union, have been called upon to lend support and resources to the Congolese government as it begins the lengthy process of meting out justice and encouraging national reconciliation. Clementine Logan, CCTV.
To get you some more analysis on that peace deal, I'm now joined in studio by Ambassador David Kikaya. He's a professor of international relations at the United States International University in Africa. Ambassador, thank you very much for your time.
My pleasure.
Looking at the text of this deal, just how comprehensive is it?
Well, you know that this deal has been brokered on the eve of a fairly weakened MR13, especially with the arrest of the former leader, and also the UN having moved in a little bit more aggressively than the usual case is. I think it's the best that M23 can get at this particular point in time.
Mm-hmm. But usually in the past we've seen incidents where the government in Kinshasa has arrived at some sort of agreement with other rebel groups, and then the accusations have fly around of one party not meeting its obligations and so on and so forth. What are the odds of both sides meeting their commitments to this deal?
I think the operative party is the operative word you've used is part, but in this particular case, party, because you know, according to this agreement, M23 having agreed to lay down their arms, opted for forming a political party. Now, the extent to which part of their militia contingents can be integrated in the national armed forces is also going to be part of the testing of the pudding.
But wasn't that the cause of the original rebellion in the first place? The whole problem of being integrated into the army?
And exactly that's what I'm saying. The interesting departure here is for them to constitute into a political entity. And perhaps if they do consider themselves into a political entity, then they'll get a political platform that would be defensive and opening doors for their own to be integrated into the system. Again, depends to what extent that party is going to garner support nationally, because, you know, basically their support tends to be in the eastern part of DRC. I think unfortunate thing here is that eastern DRC has a lot of complications. The complications that come in with the groups like in Interahamwe and then Badamulenge and then Buimai and all those other interest parties. So how the M23 is going to be able to accommodate even other interest parties in the eastern DRC is also going to be a litmus test for how even that party of theirs can have legitimacy and support.
Let's talk about those problems that you mentioned, all these other militia groups running amok in the eastern DRC, the FDLR, the Interahamwe, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, the fact that the M23 was defeated by, for the most part, aggressive UN intervention, could that act as a sort of template for future operations against the FDLR, for example, or these other militia groups roaming around in the same area?
It could be a panacea. It could be a panacea, but of course these cases have to be looked at from the individual basis and the circumstances surrounding it at that particular point. May I also mention that even with the UN intervention, it was not meant to be a prolonged intervention. So the UN would also be seriously thinking how best can we transform that intervention into a peaceable and amicable way of ameliorating this particular group into the national entity. And I think the UN will be thinking along those lines to try and come in and see how they can transform that or facilitate or help in that integration. If they succeed in that, then we'll see some semblance of peace in eastern DRC.
Indeed. Thank you very much for your time today, Ambassador David Gikaya. Fascinating chat on Chapter 7 operations, of course, and the future of the DRC, especially in the wake of that particular peace deal that was inked late last night here in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi. Let's move on to the Central African Republic now. Dozens of people looted a building as tensions escalated in the CAR's capital of Bangui on Thursday. The looters tore parts of the National Herders Association building away and looted pretty much everything inside. Now, these developments come as Muslims and Christian youths carried out revenge attacks. The country's religious leaders have sought reconciliation between Muslims and Christians, and this happened on Wednesday when the fighting subsided. That said, though, tensions do remain pretty high after the Imam of Bangui was attacked by Christian youths on Thursday. The violence has claimed the lives of hundreds of people and drawn in French troops seeking to stop the bloodshed so far.
People are demolishing everything, even upstairs, from the roof, wood, roof tiles, everything. They stole tables, benches, for nothing. They are state-owned goods.
In the meantime, the United Nations has warned that people living in the Sahel are in what it described as dire and urgent need of assistance. The region, which stretches from Mauritania in the west all the way to Eritrea in the east, is struggling with a combination of terrorism and extreme hunger. The special briefing was called by France, which currently holds the Council's rotating presidency. It is very keen to highlight the problems faced by the Sahel. Nick Harper reports from the United Nations in New York.
The Security Council's two greatest values of peace and security were under discussion, with Africa in the spotlight. In his last briefing to the Council, the UN Special Envoy for the Sahel gave an impassioned plea.
I appeal to the international community to be very generous, both to the people of Sahel, both in cash and in kind assistance, as they remain in dire and urgent need.
But the size of the region exacerbates the scale of the problem.
Porous borders, ungoverned and undergoverned spaces across the vast region facilitate the flow of illicit arms and narcotics, while also providing terrorist groups with safe havens within which they can train and plan future attacks.
Last month, UN Secretary-General Ban Ki-moon visited Mali, Niger, Burkina Faso and Chad to highlight the problems facing the region.
Across the region, terrorist acts, the trafficking of arms, drugs and people, as well as other transnational forms of organized crime are threatening security. We must do more to address the food crisis that plagued the Sahel.
It's estimated more than 11 million people are now at risk of hunger, following 3 major droughts in the last 10 years.
For too long, we have failed the Sahel.
Speaking via video phone, World Bank President Jim Yong Kim spoke of his agency's recent pledge of $1.5 billion in new regional investments over the next 2 years.
The lives of the people of the Sahel can be transformed. All they need is our sustained commitment to their vision for a better life.
Ban Ki-moon said it was time to break the cycle of poverty and instability and usher in an era of prosperity and stability. But he said with the Sahel plagued by terrorism, trafficking and food crises, it would only be possible if the numerous countries that make up the region work together. Nick Harper, CCTV at the United Nations in New York.